This video is brought to you by Squarespace and their new design intelligence. What do you do when you put Britain, Germany, and Italy into a room and tell them to design one jet that can do, well, everything? Strike targets on the ground, fight enemy air defenses, and even shoot down enemies in air combat. You get the Tornado, a swing-wing beast born from Cold War panic, built despite of the differences, and somehow it actually worked. This is the story of a plane that flew too low, hit too hard, and stayed in service way too long, while somehow earning the nickname Tomcat like it was a children's toy truck. And spoils, ladies and gentlemen, it wasn't. In the late 1960s, NATO countries faced a common problem for the world's air forces at the time. Many of their warplanes were aging, and they each needed new aircraft for a variety of roles. You see, the technology was moving so fast that in a 5 or 10 year span, you would need to design and produce a new aircraft, and then when it entered service, it would already be obsolete. And many projects drowned in this death spiral on both sides of the Iron Curtain. The biggest brains in Europe at the time thought, well, instead of going solo and each building an individual jet, why don't we team up and build one jet to rule them all? And thus, the concept of a multi-role combat aircraft was born. The first in our Avengers lineup was Britain. They had just scrapped their TSR-2 strike aircraft, which we covered in a separate video, and their attempt to buy the American F111 fell through. Desperate for a replacement, they were looking for partners. They were already developing an attacked aircraft with France called the Jaguar, and the French were initially on board for a swing-wing fighter plane, which bore the designation AFVG and looked strikingly similar to the Tornado. The French would drop out in 1967 to go build yet another Mirage, leaving Britain to search elsewhere, but now with a clear idea and blueprints on their hands. Meanwhile, West Germany was tossing around ideas with Uncle Sam for a swing-wing strike aircraft of their own. Then of course there was Italy, a country with a massive aviation history wanting to get back into the game and retire their aging jets in the process. And thus by 1968 a grand coalition of West Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, Canada, and of course Britain formed a working group to explore a common solution. The goal was ambitious, one aircraft that could do the job of many, from low-level strikes to high-altitude interceptions, so each country wouldn't need 5 different jets. It was an Avengers moment for European aerospace industries, a bit with more blueprints and less spandex. As it is often the case with group projects at school, some partners get cold feet, some lay back and chill, and 1 or 2 of them do all the work. By late 1968, Belgium, Canada, and the Netherlands had withdrawn from the program. Perhaps daunted by the complexity, or perhaps they couldn't handle the British food at the meetings, it left 3 key players to carry on the torch: UK, West Germany, and Italy. And thus, in March of 1969, these countries formally created the Panavia Aircraft Company, a tri-national company based in Munich with the sole purpose to develop the new jet. Each nation's aerospace industry took a piece of the work. Britain's BAC built the front fuselage and tail, Germany's MBB made the center fuselage, and Italy's Aeroitalia crafted the wings. Even the engines were a team effort where a separate consortium mixed British Rolls-Royce, German MTU, and Italian Fiat talents to produce the RB199 turbofan engine. In total, the work was split in a way so Brits and the Germans did 42.5% of the work, and the Italians would do the remaining 15%. Which, if we were to consider friendly stereotypes of European countries, is kind of exactly how we thought it would turn out. This design phase involved a fair bit of healthy EU discussions, as each air force had its own wish list. For example, the Brits preferred a 2-seater for all-weather, low-level missions, whereas some voices in Germany initially fancied a single-seater for agility. Thus, 2 concepts emerged: a smaller single-seat Panavia 100 and a larger Panavia 200 twin-seater. And in the end, the Panavia 200 won out. You see, the RAF wasn't budging on needing a second pilot to manage following terrain and navigation duties in the days before supercomputers. In 1971, the project was greenlit for full development, focusing on the aircraft squarely on low-level penetration strikes as its primary mission. Britain's top brass were so confident in the project that they predicted that this one jet would make up 2/3 of their future combat fleet. Wow! After 5 years of design and collaborative engineering, all while fighting about the catering in the meetings, the first prototype, called the P-01, took to the skies on the 14th of August, 1974. Taking off from Matching Air Base in West Germany, it was piloted by a British and German test pilot duo, a symbolic nod to the partnership. The 33-minute maiden flight went problem-free, much to everyone's relief. And by 1979, the first production Tornado, which was the new cool name for the aircraft, rolled out of BAC's Wharton facility in the UK. Each country's factories started churning out their share of the jets, and deliveries to squadrons began around 1980. Nearly 1,000 Tornadoes would be built in total, serving for decades, which is certainly not a bad outcome for a project some thought was a long shot. The RAF pilots called the aircraft Tonka, as Tonka toy trucks were well known as sturdy and simple. But this aircraft's engineering was anything but. Hey, it's me, Nick, here from Found and Explained. I'm on camera right now, so you know I'm not AI. So how did this idea never take over the world? Well, I know for one reason, they didn't have a website. They should have used Squarespace. Squarespace has combined 2 decades of industry-leading design expertise with cutting-edge AI technology to give you an absolute edge when it comes to creating a website. Because now Squarespace will actually recommend a fantastic design to reach your goals, a more personalized, bespoke creation, and it will never look like a template again. But building a website with Squarespace is only the beginning, because now you can run email campaigns, you can run an educational course, or if you're like me, you can run a fan website with merch. That's right, if you go to www.fanexplain.shop, that's my merch store that's powered by Squarespace. So head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use my code FOUND at squarespace.com/found to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Every single little click helps, and if you want to see more videos that are created by an actual human being, make sure to click that link. For sure, they didn't have access to the internet back then, but that's no excuse for you. The Panavia Tornado was an engineering answer to a wish list. It had to take off from short runways, scream low over enemy territory, hit targets with precision, and even dogfight if necessary. The solution? Equip it with pretty much every trick in the book. The most striking feature was its variable geometry wing, the favorite design choice of the 70s. Swept wings dominated the 1950s, reducing drag and allowing for greater top speeds, but they were the go-to design choice for fighters, so there was an issue. At low speeds and landings, they were a nightmare to fly. Then came the delta wing, but it often required canards, so it wouldn't suffer the same load speed performance and leaned towards best transonic performance, which is great again for fighters, but not that great for strike aircraft that might need a low stall speed. So the solution was a swing wing, the best of both worlds. On the ground or at low speeds, the wings could be swept fully forwards for maximum lift to allow slower, safer takeoffs and landings. And then once in normal flight, the wings would be swept back to around 45 degrees for optimal low-level cruising. And for high-speed dashes, like evading enemy interceptors or making it home in time for tea, the wings tucked all the way back to 67 degrees, making the Tornado as sleek as an arrow. This shape-shifting wing design gave the Tornado the benefits of both a straight wing, subsonic plane, and a swept wing, supersonic one. An interesting quirk of the Tornado wings were the pylon mounting points. Unlike the F-14, which had the weapons pylons mounted on the fuselage, the Tornado had them on the wings, just like the F-111, for example. Now the trouble is, when the wings move, the pylons and the weapons would move as well, right? Of course not. The Tornado features an interesting design where the whole pylon will pivot on a single point, so it's always facing the same direction, forward, regardless of the wing's position. The twin-engine, 2-seat layout allowed for higher survivability, and the pilot focused on flying, while the navigator or weapon system officer managed the complex navigation and attack systems. And boy, these were some of the most advanced systems for the era, and I'm gonna go full Cold War tech geek for a moment, so bear with me. The Tornado was one of the earliest aircrafts featuring fly-by-wire digital controls, which helped greatly and reduce the workload for the pilot. Even these controls were sort of unique because they were a hybrid between modern fly-by-wire and analog controls. The Tornado was also one of the first jets designed with an integrated digital computer, cutting-edge tech in the late 1970s. It featured a terrain-following radar that could literally fly the plane for you at low altitude, and pilots could engage in autopilot mode, coupled to the TFR, that would allow the Tornado to snake through valleys on its own, hugging the ground at 100 to 200 feet, even in poor weather or at night. Which is kind of hilarious when you think about those Tom Cruise movies where he has to fly a fighter jet through a canyon, and it's a lot of effort. They had airplanes that could do that themselves back in the 1970s. And this was exactly what NATO at the time saw as a new strategy, to sneak under Soviet radars and strike high-value targets if the Cold War ever went hot. The Tornado was like the world's most aggressive self-driving sports car, except it dropped bombs and flew supersonic. For longer range missions, the aircraft was also equipped with a retractable refueling probe. One other unusual feature that set the Tornado apart from most fighters was its thrust reversers. Yes, the Tornado engines had a reverse thrust bucket like a commercial airliner, which could be deployed after touchdown to shorten the landing roll. Only a few fighters before or since have used full-on thrust reversers, making this a cool party trick in the Tornado's repertoire. On the topic of engines, it's also interesting to note that the Tornado was able to supercruise during its testing phase, but the production models lost this capability due to the added weight and design changes. And that's not the only design change that happened when they finally got their hands on the jet. Despite the plan for a one-jet-fits-all type of solution, it turned out that there were several distinct variants to cover the spectrum of missions. The baseline model was the Tornado IDS, short for Interdictoral Strike. The IDS could carry a variety of bombs, both dumb and guided, missiles, and even a specialized dispenser for aerial denial, but more on that quirky weapon later. All three partner nations flew the IDS, and it was the backbone of the Tornado family. The Germans called their IDS Tornadoes the PA-200, and in the British service it was initially the Tornado GR-1, which stands for Ground Attack Reconnaissance. No matter the name, its job was the same: penetrate enemy airspace at low level and hit targets hard. Next came the Tornado ECR for Electronic Combat Reconnaissance. This was essentially a modified IDS equipped for SEAD missions. The ECR variant, used by Germany and Italy, carried HARM anti-radar missiles and had sensors to detect hostile emitters. It could also carry reconnaissance and electronic warfare pods. Finally, there was the oddball of the family, called the Tornado ADV, or Air Defense variant. This was one of Britain's brainchilds. The RAF needed a long-range interceptor to replace their Lightning and Phantom fighters. While the Tornado IDS was still in development, the British cooked up an air-to-air focused cousin, struck in a longer radar nose, and optimized the engines for high-altitude performance. The ADV could carry a bunch of Skyflash or AMRAAM radar-guided missiles and Sidewinders for close combat. It was fast and stable, built to intercept bombers and engage them in BVR combat. One notorious quirk of the earlier ADVs under the designation Tornado F2 was that it entered service before its radar was ready. Yes, you read that right, an interceptor without a working radar. To keep the nose from being embarrassingly empty and properly weighted, the RAF literally put in a concrete block in it as ballast. The boys then nicknamed this makeshift solution the Blue Circle Radar after a local cement brand. The real radar, the AI-24 Foxhunter, eventually arrived, and the upgraded Tornado F3 solved most of the F2's teething troubles by the late 1980s. Britain's ADVs served throughout the Gulf War and beyond, and even Italy leased a few in the late 1990s as a stopgap for air defense. But they weren't perfect, especially because the Tornado was far from a nimble dogfighter with a thrust-to-weight ratio of only 0.77, but they did the job of keeping hostile aircraft at bay until modern fighters took over. And aside from these main versions, Tornadoes found themselves in all sorts of improvisational roles. The German Navy bought 100 IDS Tornadoes for maritime strike role and armed them with Cormoran anti-ship missiles. The RAF also modified some GR-1s to carry Sea Eagle missiles for a similar purpose. And reconnaissance versions with panoramic cameras were fielded as well to snoop on enemy ground movements. In essence, the Tornado became a one-fits-all solution, just not in a single platform like modern multi-role jets. The true test of any combat aircraft is war, and the Tornado saw plenty of action in its career. Its combat debut came in the 1991 Gulf War. Both the RAF and Italian Air Force sent Tornado IDS squadrons into the Gulf, joined by Saudi Arabia's own Tornado crews as part of the coalition. When Saddam's forces dug in across Iraq and occupied Kuwait, the Tornadoes were tasked with one of the most dangerous missions: low-level strikes on heavily defended Iraqi airfields at night. RAF Tornadoes roared in at minimal altitude to drop unguided 1,000-pound bombs in low-level attacks and to scatter the infamous JP-233 runway denial weapon across Iraqi runways. Oh yes, let's talk about that quirky weapon that I teased before. The JP-233 consisted of two big dispenser pods that carpeted enemy airstrips with a mix of cratering bomblets and mines, the real definition of sending an F-bomb to the enemy pilots. The Iraqis fought back fiercely, and unfortunately several Tornadoes were lost in those first nights. In total, the RAF lost 6 Tornado GR-1s during Desert Storm, most in the low-level phase of the campaign. These pilots who had trained on this aircraft, their first experience of using it in a combat situation was some of the most dangerous missions that they ever flew in their career. They were terrified, but they had nerves of steel. Italian Tornadoes also flew daring nightly sorties, and they too suffered one jet shot down with its crew captured. After the initial wave of airfield attacks and a wake-up call notifying that modern warfare is changing, the tactics shifted greatly. The Tornadoes were moved to a medium-altitude strike mission role, employing laser-guided bombs with guidance from other coalition aircraft. With this change, and the fact that Iraqi air defenses were now getting less efficient by the day, the danger from anti-air fire decreased, and the Tornadoes continued to pulverize Iraqi targets throughout the rest of the conflict. The same Gulf War conflict also saw the Tornado ATF in combat for the first time, with the RAF deploying 18 F-3s to provide air cover for coalition forces. Although they didn't score any air-to-air kills, their presence helped enforce the Allied no-fly zone for Iraqi aircraft. After Desert Storm, Tornadoes continued to see combat throughout the 1990s and 2000s, but usually in a more precision strike role and at higher altitudes than the treetop Daredevil days. They struck targets in Bosnia and Kosovo during the 90s and later took part in the 2003 Iraq War. The RAF and Italian Tornadoes delivered guided bombs in the NATO intervention over Libya in 2011 and performed reconnaissance and bombing in Afghanistan as well. The German Tornado ECRs flew SEAD missions to conflicts in Kosovo, firing dozens of anti-radar missiles to protect other NATO aircraft. Across these operations, the Tornado proved its worth as a reliable strike platform. But by the late 2010s, the writing was on the wall for this Cold War legend. The RAF retired its last Tornado in 2019 after nearly 40 years of service. Just simply incredible run for an aircraft. Italy and Germany, the remaining operators in Europe, scheduled their Tornado fleets to phase out by the mid-2020s as new Eurofighters and F-35s take over. Saudi Arabia may keep flying their Tornado IDSs a bit longer, but they are too also eyeing newer jets. As the Tornado heads into the sunset of its operational life, it leaves behind a heck of a legacy. For decades, it was the backbone of the RAF strike force and a key player in Germany and Italia's air fleets. It demonstrated that Europe can in fact work together on a jet, a feat not to be underestimated given that many cooks in the kitchen. And yes, it's more complicated and expensive for maintenance than the aircraft with the regular wings, and as with everything Cold War made, technology advanced so far that it also soon needed expensive upgrades. Regardless, it was one of the most successful joint European jets ever made. In fact, Tornado's success paved the way for future collaborations like the Eurofighter Typhoon. Thousands of pilots and navigators from different countries trained together, sweating through the red flag exercises and real wars as well, and formed bonds thanks to this aircraft. Technically, it also proved the value of specialized design for low-level penetration in an age before stealth. It showed that swing-wing fighters could be built rugged enough for daily use, and that with the right avionics, you could achieve the holy grail of all-weather, day or night capability. The Tornado also gave us a valuable lesson in upgrade paths. Its mid-life updates kept it relevant, adding GPS, new weapons like the Storm Shadow, cruise missiles, and even modern sensors to an old airframe. Many of the Tornado's features, such as terrain hugging radar, integrated navigation, and attack and survivability, became the standard expectation in a generation of multi-role jets that followed. The Tornado truly earned its name, blowing a powerful collaborative wind through the Cold War and beyond, and with that, we're closing today's story. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey, don't forget to click the link down below for Squarespace to get 10% off your first website and domain, and plus also help all of these videos get made, because, we rely on sponsors and viewers just like you clicking on these links and actually going through and checking out the wonderful products that we have here on the channel to make these fantastic things. So thank you so much for all those people that genuinely do click on the links and go through with that. Awesome. Thanks for watching.